Good evening, and welcome to the 14th chapter of the One Book, One Minnesota statewide book club featuring Evidence of Thee by Sheila O'Connor, who is in conversation with Mubanga Kalimamukwento. The One Book, One Minnesota program is presented by the Minnesota Center for the Book and sponsored by Blaze Credit Union. I'm Elaine Hopkins, Senior Director of Programs and Services for the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, the Library of Congress designated Minnesota Center for the Book, which is located on Dakota land. As the Center for the Book, we present programming that reaches all corners of our state and promotes reading, libraries, and our state's literary legacy. We acknowledge and value the traditions of storytelling embedded in our state's land by Minnesota's original stewards of story, the Dakota, Ojibwe, and the many other tribal nations that call this place home. We at the Friends honor the knowledge of place, community, and culture rooted in these living stories as we work to lift up the voices of storytellers across our state. Thank you all for choosing to spend your time with us this evening. Now, I am very honored to introduce our featured guests. Sheila O'Connor is the author of 6 novels, winner of the Michigan Prize for Literary Fiction, Minnesota Book Awards, International Reading Award, and Midwest Booksellers Award, among numerous other recognitions. Her work has been widely anthologized and published in many magazines and journals. She's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and has been awarded 2 Bush Fellowships, Minnesota State Arts Board's Initiative Grants, and a McKnight Fellowship. She's been a residency fellow at Yaddo, the studios of Key West, Anderson Center for Interdisciplinary Studies, Tyrone Guthrie Center, and elsewhere. Mubanga Kalimamukwento is a Zambian attorney and writer. She is the winner of the 2025 Minnesota Book Award for Obligations to the Wounded, the 2022 Tusculum Review Poetry Chapbook Contest, the 2019 Dinane Debut Fiction Award, and the 2019 Kalemba Short Story Prize. Her first novel, The Morning Bird, was listed among the top 15 debut books of 2019 by Brittle Paper. Sheila and Mubanga will be discussing Evidence of Thee and the connections between their work, and then we'll be happy to answer questions from the audience. So please feel free to put those in the chat. Today's program has live captioning by Christy Arnson of Veritext. Welcome to you both, Sheila and Mubanga, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Tila, please turn your microphone on. Thanks for having us, Elaine.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I thought that bio was going to start with the fact that I was your student. That was the part I was most excited about. But I feel like everybody should know that.
And also we should say that I was a professor at Hamlin, but I am retired now from my
Yes.
professorship at Hamlin. But when I was there, you were my student.
Yes, you retired after guiding me through my MFA, getting me through my dissertation, which I know
I waited till the very end.
Yes, yes, thank you. So I love getting to talk to you even more. I feel like a good way of framing a book conversation is to get you to read a section of the book. So a good place for me is always the beginning. So why don't we just start there? Why don't you read a section, or why don't you read page 1 where there's enough text for you to get through?
Okay.
Mhm.
Yes, this is where to start V's story. V at 15 in 1935. V sentenced until 21. For what? V, the family secret I discovered at 16. My mother's missing mother never mentioned to me once. Shh. The sound of V is silence. Girl of sealed history like all those other girls, sealed, therefore buried. State documents I now excavate for answers. An official file of fact that reads like fiction. V, a fiction built of fragments, as girls so often are.
As girls so often are. What a good way to end that page. Every time I read this, I am reminded about how much it encapsulates the entire story. How reading this, I go back to it after I've read this opening and I've read the entire book. I go back and read this opening, and it helps. It's like the container for the book, even though it couldn't carry the entire book. And it almost feels like something that could have been written at the end, that could have only been written after you knew the entire story that you were going to write. And I'm curious about two things. So I'm curious about when this section of the book became what it was, but also like another craft question that I have is how the parts of the story came to you. I mean, I say this to you frequently about the thing that I always take back on a craft level is how genre is arbitrary and all these little boxes that we have can actually be contained in one space. But I'm still curious about how the story came to you and when you knew that this was the right form for this place in the story. Um, even just the arrangement, like how did you arrive at that?
Well, I have no idea actually when I wrote that. That's such an interesting question. It wasn't the first thing I wrote. I'm sure
Mhm,
of that. I'm positive of it. I know the first thing I wrote when I wrote this. The very first piece I wrote was she enters the tunnel a little fox. Little Fox is what he calls her, and she wears that clever nickname like a mask. And the
mhm,
reason I remember that was because I thought, who is this?
mhm,
I mean, when I start writing something, I don't know who anybody is.
mhm,
And I didn't know who the little fox was. I didn't know what the tunnel was. I didn't know who he was. And then these pieces were coming to me often in the middle of the night, and I was speaking them into my telephone.
mhm,
And I, but it wasn't until probably like a couple of weeks into these particular pieces coming to me that I thought, oh my gosh, that's the story of my grandmother again. Like here she is again, appearing now in these strange little pieces, and then I would like wake up in the middle of the night and say into the recording thing on my phone, everyone who knows the truth is dead.
mhm,
Like just the realization that I'm never going to have that truth. So I
mhm,
just gathered all these pieces, and then in June of that year, or maybe it was July, I had a residency at the Anderson Center in Red Wing,
mhm,
the Anderson Center for Disciplinary Artists, and it was a month-long residency. And I sat down and I put on headphones and I started typing up these individual pieces. The
mhm,
room had a lot of table space and radiator tops. And
mhm,
I would type them and I would print them, and I was just setting them around the room. And I saw that a book was beginning to form of fragments. But I am also a novelist, and I began to think like, what would this need to become a novel, the full story? So everything I knew from having written the other 5 novels before this came to bear in the way that I began to put the pieces together. And then
mhm,
I also had this very large file box with me filled with all of the historical documents that I'd been gathering for the last 20 or so years, any little piece I could find about Sauk Center. So I had those then when I wasn't um, trans transposing the or transcribing the work onto the computer. I was reading these um, mostly legal documents and
mhm.
looking through them and trying to understand what the legal document meant and how it was crossing over into this story. So I was just putting the pieces together as I wrote the book.
Yeah. The story you're telling me now sounds like a story of labor, which it is, right? Like a lot of labor went into the creation of the book.
Mhm.
And you do speak about that a little bit. And towards the end, you say, I think it's in the acknowledgments you talk about how it took you 10 years to create the book. For me, the labor is most apparent in how fluid it is, how we're able to move through the sections, even though the sections are telling us about very heavy material. And I'm curious about um, when you speak about not knowing who the characters are after such a laborious activity. What strikes me about that sentence is the almost namelessness of V, even with the little names that she has, V, and the nickname she gives herself, sort
And
of,
all the names she could have been.
and all the names she could have been, but even M and several people, right? Like they have a kind of half namedness. For me,
Mhm.
when I'm writing, like you, when I start writing, I feel like I don't know who these people are. Like there's a story coming to me, but I don't know the exact details. I don't know the shape that they are going to take in the text. And do you feel like you know them now? Do you feel like after you were done, you knew the people that you were writing about?
Boy, that's such a good question. I feel like I know the people who are in this book,
Mm-hmm.
though I do not know the. I do not
Yeah.
know the who I will never know.
Yeah.
So I can't come out of this and say I feel like I know her. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I came to know my biological grandmother in some way
Mm-hmm.
because she remains as mysterious to me today as she was when I started the book.
Yeah, that makes sense because you and me had a conversation about this a couple of days ago, or maybe I was talking in a different space about how the knowing of a character involves the naming of that character.
Mhm.
That there's this feeling that you get when you introduce yourself and say, I am Sheila. There's a truth to that statement. This is Sheila. And in the writing process, you can sometimes go through so many names before you land on the correct one. I do think V is obviously there's the scaffolding at the beginning where you give us the many different V's that V could
Yes.
be. And I've read a review that frames it as like a vacancy that
Mhm.
shows up in all the different places in the book. I'm going to ask you to read another section and then I'll move to my next question after that. It's on page 84. It's in case study, just the section under one. It's short.
Oh, just under one.
Yeah.
Okay, case studies. V blinks out of isolation, startled by a sky suddenly silver. The solitary weeks a wool hood over her head. She has a face, a footprint, which means she must be real. She can still recite the streets of Minneapolis, Aldridge Avenue through Zenith, the states, Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, etc., the Raven, Once Upon a Midnight Dreary, her times tables through 12, 127 songs from start to finish, a secret tally on the white page of her brain, 2036, the day that she has left to play their prisoner, 2036. In 4 more weeks, classified, case studied, assigned the proper cottage, V will learn exactly who she is.
Exactly who she is. So that moves us from the idea of knowing, naming, namelessness, half namelessness, to I think a related concept of what is real versus what isn't. And here we see V trying to make that distinction of like this is real and this isn't real. And for you, what remains real and what isn't? After all the work that went in, what did you feel changed in your understanding of what was real and what wasn't about this story?
Well, it's interesting. This piece you just asked me to read, I've not looked at that piece since I wrote the book,
Mm-hmm.
and I think for me, what's real in that, just in that very moment, is what it must have felt like to be held in solitary confinement. That
Mm-hmm.
feels real to me. Like everything that I imagined about what it meant to be a girl incarcerated at this time period, at locked up at 15 with no chance of parole until, well, no chance of release until the age of 21, paroled as a servant at 18. The emotional truth of that for me feels very real, because for me, it was easy to think of, how would I feel? You know,
Mhm,
I am not this girl. She and I don't have that much in common.
mhm,
Uh, but what I do have in common with her is understanding what it is to be trapped, held without choice, taken from everything that, you have known, and the way that that would feel. So for me, what's real in this are the documents, the historical documents, although what the documents say to me is fiction. When the documents talk about how wonderful the place is, how happy the girls are, how much they enjoy baking bread versus getting an education, that to me is fiction. And it's
mhm,
fiction that the state has told about this institution. What's real to me, I guess, is the truth that they said these things, that they put this stuff in writing, including the labor of the girls, everything they had to do. They were the entire labor of the institution.
mhm,
Um, and so those facts
mhm,
means so much to me, because those facts were completely unknown before I wrote this book. Like, I had no proof of what any of that was until I was able to get that ancient Osborne report in the handbook of the juvenile detention facilities. That was the first proof I had of what the place was. That
mhm.
report feels very real to me.
Yeah. And I mean, evidence of V as a story for me is proof also of the impact of like choices that we make with words. Obviously, you know this because you're a wordsmith, and the way that you make the selections of the words that you use, even in your response, tells me a lot about what you think about the facts that you found that felt like fiction. And so I'm honing in on some words in your response, like incarcerated and institution versus school and education. And this kind of framing of the experience as one that was necessary and even enjoyable to the girls that were held there. And specifically the word school, because the word school is not one that's permissible to use unless in regards to an institution in most places, unless that institution is able to show that it's imparting an education. And I'm connecting that to the idea you were talking about commonality, like what commonalities do you have, you and V? Where do you see a sort of like connection between her experience and your experience? And where do we get our knowledge from, right? Like where are we educated from? And I want you to speak a little bit about that, about how your ideas of that might have evolved through the writing of the book and even through the reflection, because sometimes I find that we learn a lot about the books that we've written after the fact, after they now exist in the world and don't belong to us anymore.
Well, the Minnesota Homeschool for Girls at
Mm-hmm,
Sauk Center
mm-hmm,
sounds like a very fine, benign, and lovely place.
mm-hmm,
It doesn't sound like a reformatory, which it was. It doesn't sound like a place where the girls are made to be servants, which they were,
mm-hmm,
or where the actual education, the primary education at the time that V was there, was teaching them to domestic skills. I mean, that was they had to complete a very rigorous domestic skills curriculum in order to be paroled as a servant.
mm-hmm,
So, they had to pass sewing and scrubbing and laundry and, uh, shoveling coal and field work, then pass all of it to be a servant,
mm-hmm,
in order to earn parole. So that's one kind of education, but I think that institutions can hide behind names that sound perfectly fine.
mm-hmm,
And I had no idea what the institution was. I mean, the only thing people said to me, I couldn't find anybody in Minnesota who could explain it to me, especially not in that time. But all that people ever said was, oh, you mean the place they sent the bad girls? Like that was how the place was defined. It wasn't even defined as a school in people talking about it, only that it was the place that they sent bad girls. Um, so one of the things that I really bristled with in continuing to write about it, and I even just hate using the term, is the Minnesota Homeschool for Girls, because I feel like I'm perpetuating a lie. I mean, that school was in existence, that reformatory was in existence for decades. I can't speak to what kind of education the girls received there later. I know that juvenile justice evolved. I certainly know that through the years. But my idea of education in 1930, in the 1930s, when V was there, is not the education that I feel like she deserved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you make a good point when you say you couldn't find anybody in Minnesota who would talk about it, to the kind of depth that you needed in order to write the story, right? And there was this, it was framed in a very specific way by the people that you spoke to, like, oh, the place where they took the bad girls. And
Mhm.
that makes me think about why that absence of story existed. Why, right? Like why the absence of this experience existed,
Yes.
why there were so many cavities for you.
Yeah.
Um, and how that connects to the way that we store stories, right? If the place where we are learning how to create stories is school, but school for the people who lived this experience meant something completely different, then they're not going to store their stories in the traditional format, right? They're not going to store their stories in a way that we can easily discern. Can we talk a little bit about that absence of story?
Yes. I mean, both here and even in like historically in homes for unwed mothers in
Mhm,
America, the girls were specifically instructed never to tell their story,
mhm,
never to tell it because it would bring shame on them.
mhm,
Like, why would you ever tell someone that you were incarcerated in a reformatory? Why would you ever tell someone you had a baby when you weren't married? Shame is such a tremendous silencer. That's the thing I just go back to all the time. The way we can silence women and girls so quickly with shame. And they were taught shame. I mean, that socially, culturally, within the religious institutions, within their families, within this institution, there was nothing but shame. But I also want to add this wonderful epigraph from
mhm.
the St. Cloud newspaper that opens the book, because I couldn't believe I even found this in my endless, rabbit hole research. This is from the St. Cloud Times at the time he was there. One of the
Mhm,
main faults of the girls, who are a healthy lot and with few social diseases, is that of lying.
mhm,
Now, the easiest thing to do to a girl who's been victimized, incarcerated, everything, is to say she's a liar.
mhm,
She's lying. And this um, this is something that was said over and over and over about these girls, that they were liars. So there is no point in the girls ever telling anyone their story because
mhm,
nobody's ever going to believe it.
mhm,
And recently there was a school in California, a juvenile detention facility, where the kids came out and said they had been abused for years in there. And they said the same thing. No one would have believed us. We told people, people didn't believe us. So
mhm.
there's also what happens to a story if it isn't going to be believed.
It isn't going to be believed.
A
Um,
story needs a receiver.
mhm.
And I just kept, when I worked on this, I just kept believing and myself delusionally that, like,
Yes.
I need someone to believe this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to tell this story and I need to convince people that it happened. I need the evidence of it, and I need people to decide for themselves what they think of it.
Mhm. That was my entry point into V's story, was recognizing the silencing power of shame, which shame is something that, I revisit over and over and over again, regardless of the text that I'm working on. And oftentimes I don't even realize that I am writing about it, right? That I'm
Right.
revisiting the same thing.
I don't think I realize I'm writing about it either.
Yes,
But
yes.
you've got motivators, you've got characters behaving a certain way. And
Mhm,
if you dig down into it, what's
mhm.
underneath it is shame, right?
Is shame. Yeah. So, there's shame, there is silencing, there is this fractured mothering, and the concept of being educated and being uneducated, um, forwards and backwards or in a circle. Is that what you think your obsession is in this text and in other text?
Wait, which of those three were my choices?
Any.
Wait, it was shame,
Shame and
educated and
silencing.
uneducated, and what was my third? Fractured motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, I think anyone who did a dissertation on my books would find fractured motherhood throughout, or fractured parentage, just a sense of families being broken. But I think maybe what my real obsession was secrecy, which
Secret.
is, again, that's in all my books too.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which secrets take hold and determine things that we can never know because we didn't even know the secret,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but the secret has got us all captive. And as this place is
Mm-hmm.
a massive secret, it's just the files are still sealed, the graveyard where the babies are buried is still unmarked. I mean, it is secret.
Yeah.
And so it's the secret of this institution. It's the secret of my family. It's the secret of this girl who was sent away, the secrets of adoption, the secrets of sealed records in adoption. Yeah, that is my obsession.
Yeah. I mean, I'm obsessed with
Being kept from
secrecy.
information is my obsession.
I am obsessed with writing about secrecy, but also writing about why the thing is secret, right? Like
Yes.
poking holes about why the thing is secret. And,
And do
as
you
you know,
always
often
find out?
no, you don't always find out. And I'm curious about resistance because, you spoke about how in order for a story to be told, there has to be someone who's listening on the other end, right? And I want to push at that a little bit. Like, what do you feel like you faced any resistance to this story, or do you feel like it's old enough that there's no resistance to the telling in this way?
You mean out in the world or
Yeah.
inside me? Out in the world. Oh
Mhm.
no, I'm sure there's plenty of resistance to this story in the world.
Have you encountered it? Have you personally encountered that resistance?
I think what one thing I personally encountered is people saying, it wasn't like that later.
Mm,
It wasn't that kind of place later.
mm,
Good people worked here, it was a good place for the girls. And I do understand that there are probably girls that I don't think it was common, but that felt like this was safer than their house,
mm,
that they had come from abusive families and maybe it was a better situation. But it's sort of like, what would you rather have, incarceration or an abusive family? I mean, this isn't what any child wants.
mhm, mhm,
So I think that I'm sure there's plenty of resistance, but fortunately, I don't think it's finding its way into those people's hands.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think
Maybe
the
after
resistance.
tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I think the resistance is especially interesting when it comes sometimes from people who are very close to the subject of the text, right?
Yes.
Even if it's like historically, we're not so far removed that you couldn't encounter someone. You were speaking earlier about that often the story will land in the hands of people who can relate to it, who know someone who knew someone, directly in their
Right.
family or otherwise. Yeah. So, my struggle tends to be when the resistance is coming from somebody who's experienced this fictional world that you've created, and almost feeling, do you feel like you need to explain why you wrote it in this way?
No.
No.
Well, no one's that interested.
I am.
I'm
What is
thinking to
it?
explain to whom. I mean,
Yeah.
I have several times been at the, Shakopee Women's Prison and
Hmm.
have had women there read it and
Hmm.
gone for a book club. I was there last week for a class that read it and was able to hear from those women. And the women who have been incarcerated seem to say this is all true.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And even one of the former superintendents said to me, you keep talking about it being imagined, but it is a very true book. And he
Hmm.
was the superintendent there and he said it to me. So I think I don't know I got off track.
No.
I believe that people that are in a position to judge the veracity of it find
Mhm.
it to be true.
True. Okay, so let's go back to obsessions. Let's
Yes.
go back to obsessions.
No, I love an obsession.
Literary obsessions, which I think it's true of most writers that there is something you are circling, something that you're trying to figure out. Um, with what we said earlier about the namelessness or half-namedness of V and some of the characters, and your sort of space that you have from some of them, right? The inability to fully know.
Yeah.
What do you think, still needs to be said about this story?
Well, this I only had one period of time and one person's file. I
Mhm.
have met with other people. People contact me and they're just discovering that through finding out about my book or articles that have been written about it. They're
Mhm.
saying, wait, my mother's birth certificate was Sauk Center. I wonder if this is her. People are contacting me and saying, I want to find these records. How do I get these records? We had to file through the courts to get the records, so will everybody else. But I this is such a large history and it begins before V is there and it goes on well after she was there. And I really would give anything to have like a historian, a feminist scholar, somebody take this up with me, where we could really dig into it. Was a young woman at the U doing an undergrad, doing so much research, and she was there at the Gale Family Library where the records were held, just long hours, but she was just doing it all by herself. And then she graduated and took a full-time job. But this is Minnesota history. It's national history, of course, but it's
Mhm.
Minnesota history that could involve artists and writers and historians, public historians, people that could bring this all out to the light. And there is a project out of Hudson called Incorrigibles, where they have really been able to advance the history of the Hudson School
Mhm.
through this kind of engagement. And I guess that's what I would really hope, is that other people would come forward and help pick it up because it's so worth studying.
Mhm. Because it's more than just a personal story, right? Like
Yes, to me, it's so
it's a
far beyond a
collective.
personal story.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think that's why it's important that V remains V, actually. Yeah. But
Oh, say more about that, Mubanga.
I mean, I think when you receive a name, I'm thinking about the process of receiving a name here, not in a book, right? The process of receiving a name when you're born, that oftentimes that's the name that you carry all the way through. And there's a finality to it for me. Once you it's on so much paperwork, like this is who you are, and the stories that are attached to that name somehow become yours. And I think in leaving V as V, you leave that space for all the different versions of V to join in the storytelling, like to make it a bit more communal, which I think is what I'm hearing you say right now.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So that's why I think
I
it's
started, I mean, believe me, when I started this, I wanted to understand my family.
mm-hmm,
And I never thought I was going to uncover its
mm-hmm,
history. I just never thought I was going to uncover it. And the more I uncovered, the more horrified I was about it. Then when I discovered that this is the same thing going on today with, in juvenile detention with girls. I mean, I was just like, oh my God, the story's not ending. And what I thought was really just what was the story of my mom's mom that led her to have the life that she had and led my mother to be, my mother was very competent, capable, person, but she had, I believe, scars from this, even though
mm-hmm,
she didn't think she did, of course.
mm-hmm.
But I I think that I thought I was going to answer that question, and instead I came upon just this huge Pandora's box.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna pause here to take some questions, which I will, but I want to go into what you said about your mother had scars from it, which you don't think she realized that she did, right?
Yeah,
And
she did.
connect that to how at the beginning you were talking about how yes, the beginning of the writing of the story was an attempt at discovering some information about your family, but that this isn't necessarily your story, and it also isn't necessarily your grandmother's story, right? Like there was a
Right.
trigger, but then this is what fiction writers do. But I also think that there's something there about you, about this, about what scars we carry and how those demand that we are the ones to write the story.
Mhm.
How our bodies remember, even if we don't remember the way that we came to be, you
Yeah.
know?
Yes.
And I think a big part of a story being successfully written is the pen being in the hand of the right person.
Mm.
That
Well,
this that this very same
such a
story,
beautiful thing to say
yeah, I
as
think
a book.
this very same story in the hands of somebody else who for who and there's multiple ways to know a thing, but there's something specific about a personal knowledge, and the personal knowledge doesn't necessarily come from experiencing it. There's a way that we recollect things even if we don't fully recollect them.
Yes. Yes.
So I think the thing you were saying about your mother is true about yourself, about me,
Yes.
about the choices that we make, whether it's even true that we are making choices
Mhm.
in the stories that we are writing.
Yes, I think we have all carried in our family so much of
Mm,
and so much of the trauma of this
mm,
experience.
mhm,
And that was the beginning of what made me ask my mother if we could petition the court,
mm,
for these records, because the trauma in my family felt inexplicable almost.
mm,
I just couldn't account for all of it. I couldn't
mhm,
explain it all. There was no rational explanation in the world around me, and
mhm,
nothing. Literally, I couldn't name it. And I kept thinking, well, what about her? What about her? I mean, your birth mother, committed suicide, died in a very disturbing way. And my mom was like, that's not anything to do with us. And I was like, but it might, but
It
it
might.
might.
Yeah.
And then when I found out that there was this file and that they were sealing it and keeping it from me, but the court could grant me permission to look at it, that was where I sat and I looked at that file and I was like, this is it.
Mhm,
This is all of it. Now I can't account for what led V, what I can't account for V's trauma prior
Mhm,
to being in
mhm,
that situation,
mhm,
but I can account for all the ways that we inherited. That we inherited the non-compliance, we inherited, we were just all feminists. My mother was a feminist from birth. There was just a sense of like, no one's going to tell me what to do.
what to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I couldn't even account for why there, and that almost to the level of rage, like
Mhm,
absolutely not,
mhm,
and even my mother didn't want us to have anybody tell us what to do. She was like, they can't tell you what to do. Like it was so strong in our family, that I couldn't even understand where it came from. But then when I know this, I'm like, of course, my mother just had that in her blood of, the circumstances she was born in. But she never knew this. I mean, she didn't know it until the day we looked at that file.
mhm. And honestly, I see it a little bit in V as well. V was, very much there were a lot of things that were burdened on her, but there was a way that V would resist in the little ways. Like she would take the moments of power and use them for herself,
Mhm.
right? So I like this
I know
concept of
she did.
resistance. Yeah, I
I
like
know,
this concept of
I just know she did because I know
yes.
my mom and I know us. And I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I really like this concept of resistance because I've been thinking about it more recently and it's helping me reframe my mother because my mother was more a silent resistor. I'm more like, well, I'm going to talk about it. But she was more like, I'm just going to do the thing that I want to do. But
Mhm.
I think this is a good place to take some questions because some of the questions we're talking about this idea of what is remembered versus what is not remembered. And I saw a question okay, I see it. It's from someone named Kathy Peterson, who says, my grandmother was also sentenced to the Salk Center homeschool for girls and had a mother there in 1933. And she was also a V. Viola, have you ever tried to connect to your grandmother through a psychic, Sheila? Um, Catherine says they have done this and it was astounding. And Kathy has started a book about their grandmother, V, and the mysteries behind it all. So the psychic question, have you, Sheila?
No, but it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to it.
If you do it, you should take me with you. We should go
I
together.
will. I
So
will.
then, because it might feel really, one of us might need to drive the other person
Yes,
back.
right.
Yes. So thanks for that idea, Kathy. Sheila hasn't done it. And then I'm trying to look and see if there, a lot of them are comments, but I'm trying to look and see if there are other questions. I know Wendy and Elaine had prepared some questions as well, so I'll let them ask one or two now, and then I can go back to asking. Elaine, did you have anything?
Sorry, let me come back on. Um, I um I had a different question, but I'm really super intrigued by where the conversation went with this idea of the trauma that you carry. And I'm curious, Sheila, or you too, Mubanga, as you've experienced things, did you find, Sheila, you always had that realization of the trauma that you were carrying, or did it hit you at a certain point in life? It is not the same at all, but my mother's, both of her parents were orphans. And when they were adopted, and that lack of extended family and knowledge about where she came from hit her later in life. I mean, or to that I was aware of at least. So I was just kind of curious if you felt it all the time or if it came to you more at a certain point or ebbed and flowed for you or either of you as you experienced that. If that question makes sense.
It does.
I think I always felt it. You, Mubanga?
Yeah, I always felt it. There was a point, Sheila, when you said something about not having witnesses, something about knowing something but not having evidence of it. And for me, one of the ways which is why I think we should take up the psychic, we should take up
Yes.
the
Yes,
psychic
let's. But you
is
drive.
is because I can drive, but you might have to drive back because I'm
Yes.
like a
Okay.
crier, as you know. But I said this the other day, but I didn't say it in full, that I used to have a dream about the loss of my parents and the loss of my sister, and I would wake up frantic and I would tell my mother about it, and she'd say it's just a dream. And I had it for I don't know how many times, it must have been three or four, and then I stopped having it. And then eventually they all died. And the first thing I thought when I was told that my dad had died, I tried to call him, but maddeningly, I tried to call him and he didn't pick up, obviously. The first thing I thought was, oh, now I don't have a witness. Now it's almost a lie. And so I circle back to it. I write like poems about it and stories.
You
Um,
mean it was you don't have a witness to that dream that you said
yes.
you had that dream? I
Yeah.
always tell people to write my things down.
Yeah.
I'm telling you this, write it down because there's not going to be any proof that you knew
Yes.
that you
Yes. And to Elaine's question, which is to say that after that, I became so attentive after my father died. There's a way that I remember things in so much because I think I used to feel like, oh, I have to remember this. I have to, what if this is important? What if this is important? So Sheila, when I would write and you'd say, oh, this is so much detail, because I would be paying attention to absolutely every little thing, this sense of like, I need, even if it's me who's the witness.
Mhm.
Yeah. Someone is asking, can you talk about courage to tell right stories when you're not sure the stories will have an audience and who will believe you?
This came to my mind before when you were talking about the receiver, like believing that there's somebody to receive it. The when I had finished my first book, Tokens of Grace,
Mhm.
and I got to the last line, and lines just come to you.
Yes.
And the last line was like, what is faith anyway, but a last hope that someone kind is listening?
Mhm.
And I thought that's this whole book was just a hope that someone kind is listening. And that was all the book was about. And I think I arrived at that having written it. And since that time, I've always had this sense that someone kind is listening.
Mhm.
When I write to that person.
Person.
I write to the person that I think is going to have their heart open for this story. I know there are people who don't care about this story, don't want to see the story written, don't like experimental prose. I know all that, but I have to believe that there's somebody out there that wants to hear this story. And part of what I believed in this case was that the girls were there. And
Mhm.
the one thing I knew is that their story had never been told.
Mhm.
So when I hear from them, when they call me or email me and say, I can't believe you told this story. There's no evidence of me ever having even been there.
Mhm.
Like I just believed that was the number one person I believed would be there, would be the girls
In the
for whom
story.
their story hadn't been told.
Mhm. That shows up so much in your teaching. The idea that there is a kindness out there that is waiting to listen, to read that story. But the way that it shows up is you're that kind person
I
for
am.
so many of us. I know you are that for me. In the moments when I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if this is landing, if this is making any sense. Like you're such a mirror of that in reminding me, and I'm sure so many of your other students, that the story exists in you because somebody's waiting to receive it.
And
uh,
only you have it.
and only you have it, and only you have it. um okay,
So you have to tell it.
let me look through. I think I saw a question, or maybe it was just a comment. Okay, so it was just a comment. Do I still have time? Because I want to keep you to myself.
Yes,
Okay.
I hope that Elaine will save these comments somehow for me. So I
Yes,
can read them
yes.
after because I don't have the comments in front of me. Is somebody saying
And
something?
you have to be ready for all my hard-hitting questions. You can't be
Yeah.
distracted.
We will save it, I promise. Yes, it'll be saved.
Yeah,
Um,
so Catherine Reed Day just had said,
mhm,
can this statement of faith be a light in our dark times to hope, imagine, trust that someone kind is listening? I mean, I think so. I think it's very hard to go to the page without being able to believe that, you know? I mean, we have to believe that people care. And I don't mean that people have to care about everything I write. I don't believe that. But I think that because also I write for young people, you know, I've written 3 full-length novels for younger readers. And there again, I'm like, I'm in conversation with these kids. And I
mhm,
want to say something to these kids that I think they want to hear,
mhm.
not need to hear, but maybe want to hear
You
or
want
have
to hear.
felt the same. So I think all of this is really just feeling like there's a listener. Might
Yeah,
only be one.
yeah. How much time? We still have time. Yay. Okay.
Yes.
Sheila, do you mind reading one more section? Because I like hearing it in your voice.
Okay.
It's different if I read it in my head. It's on page 189.
Oh, yes. All of these make me sad to read them aloud again because I haven't seen them, you know,
Mhm,
but this one, yeah, this one's interesting. The fallacy of erasure, the fallacy of a clean slate, of starting fresh, the
mhm,
fallacy of new beginnings, of self-invention, of good girl, bad girl, the fallacy of being born a child like any other child, the fallacy of bootstraps, the fallacy of self-improvement, the fallacy of education, of amnesia, the fallacy of training and retraining, the fallacy of effort, of merit and demerit, the fallacy of servants just like family, the fallacy of family, the fallacy of earning or deserving, the fallacy of opportunity, of chances granted by sweet charity, the fallacy of handouts, gifts, as if you haven't paid, the fallacy of reclamation and reform.
mhm. It's sad. Yes, it's
But
sad.
it's mad. It's
Yes.
mad.
What lingers for me, what this almost feels like is the sense of knowing that we have as children. The sense of knowing and the lack of the language to communicate with those that have existed longer than us, to
Mhm.
communicate the things that we know, is what is showing up in this text for me. And I remember you reacting so strongly to a poem of mine, and now listening to you read this reminds me why. Um, and also tells me a lot about why you're able to write for children, because I think you're able to tap into that place before all these fallacies that you write about, before they start to feel true in our minds, before we absorb them and say, this is true, that erasure is true, and clean slates and beginnings and bad girls and being born a child and so on and so forth. How much do you travel back in time when you write? How much do you go back to being little?
I think, and I'm afraid that I always write as a child.
Me
You
too.
know, I think I do. I
Me too.
think I write as a child,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
writing and seeing the world and the way the world looks to me
Mm-hmm.
in the lies both that I've been told, you know, the disillusionment, but also the hope, the way you, the way as a child you have these hopes, you know, that if again that someone kind is listening, that feels like a child impulse to me. So I'm sure that I am an eternal child. I
Mm-hmm.
love kids, you know, I love kids.
I know, and my kids love you.
I really love them. And I just think like they know everything. And I think there's not much space between me and them in the
Mm.
world.
Yeah, there really isn't. I can see that in the way that you interact with children, in your ease in writing for children, and in the way that child knowingness shows up even in texts that aren't meant for children.
Right.
And this to me is the evidence of that memory that we were talking about earlier. The
But you
same,
have the same thing.
I know. That's why I
That's
see
why
it.
we're twins.
That's why we're twins. In another life, we were twins. This is why we have to go to the psychic. I'm going to like stay on
It's
that.
too crazy. I mean, you'll write these things, and I'm like, but oh my gosh, that
Yeah,
exact thing happened to me. And I wrote something like, not this, of course, because I wasn't raised in Zambia. I didn't
yeah,
have your life, but
yeah.
I mean, it has to do with the sensibility of a child.
Mm-hmm,
In the end,
mm-hmm.
I
It
think
has.
that's really true of both of us. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I think it answers Elaine's question of like when did you know? And I think it's almost not when did you know, but when did you decide not to let it go? When did you decide to
Uh-huh.
like keep holding on to it? And in the twinning, your word was fallacy and my word was futility. Do you remember that poem?
Utility.
Yeah, mine was futile, futile, futile over and over again.
Mhm.
And that's what reminded me of that sense of knowing that recognizing some of the pointlessness of the rules that we have to abide by
Yes.
um, as children,
That
as we get
piece
older.
has
Mhm.
a great sigh of futility in it, the
Yes,
fallacy piece. It
a
just
great.
feels like you might as well just wrap that up with you.
So
Yeah.
rage, as you put it, is a perfect descriptor and sad
Yes.
too.
Yes.
But I felt like that would be a good closing reading to,
So
yeah,
send everyone off with the
to
rage.
send everyone
Yeah.
off with this like so
Yeah.
then like the thoughts that send me off to sleep everybody else has to do with it as well. But yes, thank you, Sheila, for answering all my
Thank you. Thank you, Mubongo. It was a
questions.
great conversation, which I knew it would
Yeah,
be.
I
And
would, yeah,
for some reason, we're finding things to discuss that we have yet to
that
discuss.
we've
So
never talked about
it's a miracle.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of them didn't even make it to my little stack of questions. Some of them were just coming from because as you were saying things, I was like, oh, she's never told me that. Maybe let me ask this other thing. And then
It
when I
was all
meet
new.
you, I'll ask more things when I
We'll
see
talk
you.
again.
Yes, yes. Elaine will let you, we
Okay.
we don't stop talking. So just
No, thank you both so, so much. And thank you to everyone for your comments and questions. And I was struck by so many things as you both were talking. And it's always funny to, attend and be part of these programs in a room by yourself because I'm going,
Right.
and I'm nodding and I'm like laughing or being moved. But this felt very much like we were all experiencing it together. And I think I'm leaving, I mean, amazed by the both of you who are truly stars. So thank you for that.
thank you.
But that fallacy section felt so very of the moment that I think we
Yeah.
are all living in too. But the part that balances out, I think the sadness and the frustration of it is the fact that you are both in the world telling stories, and many of our listeners to this program are in the world telling stories, and that itself is the act of resistance to push back against it. And so
And also that people care about this story,
They do.
that all these people signed on because they care about this story. And
Mhm.
that means they care about girls and women and what's happening to them. And, it's all just important. There's just love in all of that. But Elaine, and will I get the transcript of the comments? Because I haven't been able to look at them.
Yes, and Sheila, someone did say already that they would love to work on a collective project with you
Yes.
about this section of Minnesota history. So, yeah,
That's
once you
my
get,
way.
you'll be able to see who that person
Yes.
is.
That's
Yeah.
Yes.
great.
Yes, absolutely. We have saved the chat, and of course, people keep adding to it, so I have to keep resaving it. But we will get every last comment. So thank
Oh,
you,
I
everyone.
also wanted to say that I will be at Crooners next. I think it's
Thursday,
next
Thursday.
Thursday. Mubanga
Yeah.
knows my schedule better than I do. Next Thursday night, and I will be there with Autumn Mason, the head of the Minnesota Prison Doula Project,
Mhm.
and uh, And then with Jonathan Brooke and Lori Hagee, the playwright and the composer that are working on the musical of V. So they will be singing songs from V, and we will be part of Sue Scott's Island of Discarded Women. How did I forget that? Anyway, I don't know if there's still tickets available, but it will be on a podcast afterward. People that are interested in hearing the conversation, I'm very excited about talking to Autumn, and also hearing the music that they've made for Evidence of V. The music is gorgeous.
Incredible. Yeah, the music is what I remember most. The casting was perfect, like I said, but the music, yeah, they hit every beat.
So they'll be singing some songs from it, and crooners, Island of Discarded Women.
Yes.
Very good place for V.
Yes. Someone has put it in the message section already. So
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. Thank you, whoever put that in.
Yes.
And thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Mubanga.
Thank you, Sheila.
I'm very lucky. What a great night.
I'm so lucky to have run into you in the crazy way that I did. But yes, thank you again.
Yes, and thank you to everyone. I'd like to say a final thank you to our sponsor, Blaze Credit Union, and our partners in this program, which are the Council of Regional Public Library Administrators, Mackin VIA, Minitex, the Minnesota Department of Education, Rose Medal Press, and State Library Services. This program is made possible in part by the state of Minnesota through an appropriation to the Minnesota Department of Education. So we do, I think that we know how everyone here felt about this program tonight, but the overall One Book, your thoughts on the overall One Book program are important to us. So when you get an email with the link to the recording, there will also be a brief survey. So I hope that you will take a couple of minutes and fill that out. We will be definitely promoting the recording of this because how could anyone miss it? So it will be available on the Friends YouTube channel, and then we'll make it sort of available to everyone to see again. Those of you who are attending tonight, and then you can spread the word, and other people can watch it in the recording as well. So. As always, and if you haven't, I think everyone at this program has read The Evidence of V, but the ebook is still available for another week and a half. So if there's anyone in your life who lives in Minnesota and has not yet read Evidence of V, you can read it via eBooks Minnesota. Just go to thefriends.org/onebook and you can get that link. And the ebook is available through Sunday, September 28th. Oh, and Wendy put it in the chat right there. So thank you again. I am leaving this program with so much appreciation for the two of you and for all of our thoughtful listeners and readers. Thank you to everyone for being a part of One Book, One Minnesota, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.